Welcome, everybody, to Too Legit to Crit, a tabletop role-playing podcast hosted by two guys who are so dumb they provoke attacks of opportunity when they try and think. Now, you may have noticed that there was a lack of a reaction from my co-host, Still Justin, and there is a very good reason for that. Unfortunately, Still Justin has come down with a severe case of the lurgy, and he will not be actively taking part in this episode, but he is here. He is behind the scenes. He is taking care of all the production, and this can serve as evidence in case I'm ever accused of his disappearance. However, from time to time, Justin and I do like to bring on people to this podcast who, let's just say, know what they're talking about, because God knows we do not. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Emma from Tabletop Tale Spinners to our show today. Emma, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you very much. And I just really want to kind of thank you for joining us today and, making us look good, because we don't do that on our own.
Absolutely. It's always fun to get a chance to jump in and talk about different TTRPGs with different people and see kind of what everyone else is. Okay, here's the part where I had a thought and then I lost it happens. See what everyone else is playing as well and talk to them about what stuff they like to play rather than just our usual crowd.
No, that is true. And don't worry about having thoughts and losing them. Justin and I rarely have thoughts anyway. So, you've definitely got one up on us. So why don't you tell us about Tabletop Tale Spinners and what it is that you guys do?
Absolutely. So, Tabletop Tale Spinners Network is a podcast network that focuses on producing actual plays and audio drama style actual plays to sort of create stories and show how those stories can be fostered through the lens of TTRPGs in particular. So, a lot of people think that you either have the story or the system, and that sometimes the mechanics get in the way of the system. We like to try and find ways where we can make the two work together to serve the story.
Okay. I mean, we did take a look at your the podcast that you produce a couple of episodes ago, and that's how all this came about, because we kind of began talking and there is, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Chronicles of Kriath.
Kriath, yes.
Kriath, yes. That did cause an issue when we were initially, because I had no idea how to pronounce it. So I'm glad that you said it before I did earlier. Because that would have been embarrassing, almost like calling you by the wrong name. That would have been weird. So would you like to tell us about that first before we kind of?
Absolutely. Chronicles of Kriath was our sort of flagship podcast and how we got all of this started. So that was my podcast where I GM'd, but I started it we started recording in November 2021 and then released our first episode in January of 2022. And it's been going for about, it's been about 2 years now. We're on hiatus currently to get caught up with some editing and such, because real life does happen. So taking that hiatus is important when you need it. But we will be bringing it back in February to hopefully finish up the final couple arcs that we have planned for that one. It's to explain the systems and everything behind it. It's a D&D 5e podcast where these characters are navigating this new world that is still kind of in that phase where the gods control a lot of where things are leaning. And so they're sort of coming in conflict with the interests of the common people and how the actions of the gods are affecting what the common people experience.
That sounds fascinating. And am I right in assuming that that is a homebrew world?
Yes. So that is entirely
Yeah.
homebrewed by me. Yes.
I'm really, really invested in that. I mean, I think a lot of our listeners will know that I'm not the biggest fan of 5e as a system,
Mhm.
but the moment you say homebrewed worlds, I'm definitely there for that. Just I
Cool.
love seeing what people create. I love seeing what people come up with, and I will definitely
Mhm.
be giving that a listen. Although my podcast listening time is quite limited these days, but I'll definitely be giving that a listen. And then the other one, and this is the one that I kind of really kind of um was mostly interested in, was Improv Madness.
Yes. So that was a really fun idea that I had that I decided to take to podcast after all my friends enjoyed it a little too much. But basically, the premise behind it is everyone shows up with zero prep done. The GM has prepped no campaign, the players have prepped no characters, and I've created a table to roll on where people can roll up basics of their character, race, class, background, things of that nature. And depending on the system, obviously we tailor the table to the mechanics of it.
Hmm.
Uh, so we mainly started using 5e. There are a couple we've mostly wrapped recording on our second season, and there are a couple of other systems that we threw into our second season, such as there's a new system coming out called Sagas, setting and genre agnostic system that was developed by a friend of mine, Dennis or OKSDM. And it's super simple, honestly, the easiest TTRPG I've ever learned. And we set up a recording with him for that system, putting everything in the random tables. And then we haven't recorded this one yet at the time of this, but there will be a Delta Green episode included in our second season. So I figured that one would excite you because I know you love Delta Green.
Yes, I do. I do. I want to. Oh, that. Yeah, that sounds phenomenal.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah. So
I'm
I mean, so like, yeah, I mean, you've opened the door now, so we may as well go through it. So Delta Green. So what sort of aspects of character creation would be randomized for a Delta Green?
So I am working with my friend Juicy Garland, who has done a lot of work with Delta Green and done some actual plays with that in order to produce that. We haven't quite created the tables yet, so I'm waiting for their insight on some of it. But from what little I know of the system, I've played it a couple times, but haven't sort of done the full deep dive as a GM yet. Uh, Things like, because I've noticed, at least with it, like things like the profession,
Yeah.
some of your bonds and things like that would probably be randomized. Not necessarily all of them, but giving someone at least like one of their most important bonds, having that be randomized can put a huge influence on how they create their character from there. So having that randomized, I feel like would create a really interesting place where people would think about it. Because if you roll for your profession, let's say a firefighter, and then all of a sudden your bond is someone from a completely different area. So like uh that firefighter is going to be very differently influenced if their bond is like a spouse or a friend as opposed to like a coworker. Uh
Yeah.
in that sense. So,
That just sounds amazing. I mean, if you ever need an extra player for that, especially the Delta Green stuff, I'm free. I'm free.
Absolutely. I will definitely keep you on the list and see if we get another one going of that one, 'cause, we only did one of it as a bonus episode, but if people enjoy the Delta Green and how that fits into the improv madness, we could probably make that a regular thing.
Oh well, yeah, definitely. If you are able to add me to that list, I will. I'm already looking forward to it. My mind is already kind of going, okay, so what sort of characters could it be, and what sort of weird combinations could result.
Mhm.
So yeah, that sounds phenomenal, and I think it's different. It's something that you don't exactly see with a lot
Mhm.
of actual plays. The fact of, okay, we have no idea what's going to happen. We don't know what's going on. Let's roll. And I listened to a character creation
Mhm.
episode where you were rolling on the tables, and then it's okay. So this is the information I've got. I'm gonna go away and I'm gonna write a backstory for this.
Mhm.
And that for me just sounds like so much fun because just you give me the mechanics and tell me to write a backstory and make it work and make it fit. I am definitely all about that.
Mhm. And it was fun watching people walk away from those character creation episodes and saying, "Okay, I have an hour to put together a backstory for all this craziness I just rolled on this table. How am I gonna do this?" And then seeing them come through in that time pressure and say, "Okay, I figured out how to make this work, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense mechanics-wise. This is why each mechanic fits into this character backstory-wise." And that's the stuff I love to see as a GM, when people find a way to make those weird combinations work.
Yeah, and there was also one of your players that never played dwarves,
Mhm.
and they rolled a dwarf, and it was like, well, fuck.
That was really funny because they rolled a dwarf both times that they played that season, and it was so funny to me because they were just like, "I don't like dwarves," and the dice were like, "Well, too bad. You're playing dwarfs this season," and they had fun with it, even if it wasn't their favorite race to play.
I feel that is something that would happen to Justin because his dice rolls are notorious at this point,
Oh, really?
and I think I am fairly certain that if Justin were to roll up a character in that fashion, he would roll precisely the thing he hated playing the most.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and he is nodding in agreement. So.
Well, and that's always something interesting too, because I've seen certain people, like, I'm the kind of person when I play a TTRPG, I'm usually stuck as the forever DM, but when I'm not, I'm like, "Okay, what things have I not played and what can I explore?" And I
Yeah.
usually try to play and try as many things as possible just to sort of see how they work in the scope of the whatever system I'm playing. And it's interesting seeing certain people who are, like, also embrace that idea and are like, "Oh, yeah, I wanna try everything." Like, I can make a backstory that works with any type of race, class, what have you. And then there are
Hmm.
other people that sort of have their niche and they stick to it because they know it's what they like, and they know they have certain things that they don't.
I'm kind of in between the two positions.
Mhm.
When I get to play, which isn't that often, for the most part, it's in Pathfinder Society. So it's a
Okay.
series of one shots. So I don't really build characters that I necessarily get invested in.
Okay.
I'll build stuff for fun. Well, okay, I want to
Mhm.
try out this class. I've got a weird concept that I want to kind of run with, and I'll try many different things just because the nature of society play is okay. You
Mhm.
find this table, you do this adventure, you go on to the next table.
Mhm.
Whereas it's only recently I've had the chance to actually create a character for a campaign, which is our Fabula Ultima campaign that our
Mhm.
friend Couch is running. And even though I didn't build the character from scratch, I took a pre-gen and started running with it. I do
Okay.
feel like I'm quite protective of the sort of choices I make as opposed to, oh, I want to try this. I want to. It's like, no, I want to try. I've got this concept in mind. I've got this vision for him, and that's how it's going to play out. So,
Mhm.
and Fabula allows you to do that. So that is a really good sort of point in favor of that system. So yeah, I'm a kind of a mix between them. I don't get to play that
Mhm.
often, but when I do, I do like to create a character that I'm comfortable with.
Mhm. And that's fair. And there is definitely a different approach to a character that you know you're gonna play long term as opposed to, "Oh, this is just a one shot. I'm gonna mess around and do whatever and, like, have fun with it," as opposed to, "I'm gonna be locked into playing this character for 2 years. I need to make sure that this is something I'm comfortable with and I'm gonna have fun doing." Though it's funny I say that because I just prepped for a campaign that I'm finally gonna get to play in, and I've never played a wizard in D&D before, and what did I choose to play? A wizard.
To be fair, I've never played a wizard either in any of the systems. I've played casters, but I've
Mhm.
never played a wizard. To
Hmm.
be honest, I've never played a prepared caster. So it's a wizard, a
Okay.
cleric, anything that has to do daily spells. I've never done that.
See, I've played some, like, druids and clerics before for, like, shorter term games, but, I've never really played them for long-term campaigns. I'm the type of person that definitely defaults to things like fighter paladin. Like,
Hmm.
if there's spells involved, they're sort of only half of what that character has available to them. So this is gonna be a different challenge in and of itself for wizards because they rely solely on spells pretty much.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I do like versatility
Mhm.
over kind of singular focus. So I mean, for me, my default class has always been bard.
Mm.
So, there is, at least in Pathfinder, they are, they're casters, but as well, they do have other abilities that don't just lock them in to, oh,
Mhm.
this is what I can do. These are the spells I can do. So I've always liked bards for that reason. And even in some of the other things I've chosen, I've always gone for versatility. I don't normally lean on singular focus sort of characters.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because I like that versatility aspect in the sense that it's like, if one thing's not working, I always have a backup.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
because a lot of different DMs will go into, running a game and they're gonna say like, "Oh, I wanna throw an interesting challenge at my players." Well, what have they been doing a lot of? "Oh, are they casting a lot of spells? Then let's make something with some spell resistances so that their spells aren't as effective." Then all the spellcasters who are sole spellcasters are sitting there going, "Well, I can't do too much here." But when you have that level of versatility, it's really nice to be able to say, "Okay, well, spells won't work for this battle. Time to take out the sword and, see what we can do here."
Yeah, and I kind of see that is quite common in like the major D20 kind of systems, D&D, Pathfinder.
Mhm.
There is a blind spot for every class, as it were,
Mhm.
where in certain combats, something's going to get thrown of you, and you are, for the most part, useless.
Mhm.
We had one in Abomination Vault where one of the players who was playing a caster character was getting really frustrated because they came up against wisps who are
Mm.
immune to magic.
Yikes.
And some of the comments is, well, I can't do anything. I'm useless. And
Mhm.
I do kind of feel for players in that position, but it is to a certain degree one of the detriments of like the major D20 systems that there is a blind spot to most classes that in certain aspects, unfortunately, you are not going to feel as useful as you normally do. And I
Mhm.
think it's just something to kind of keep in mind as a GM.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that I like to consider. I'm more of a when I run games for the story. And my players usually know that like this most of the combats are tied directly into the story. That's why if you listen to Chronicles of Kriath, a lot of what I do, they're not fighting a lot of monsters. They're mainly fighting people that have to do with a lot of the things that the issues that they're encountering as they're traveling the world and seeing some of the effects that what's going on in the world is having on those people and driving them to evil and uh to do harm in these villages, like uh to try not to spoil anything too much. One of them that they came across was a necromancer who had essentially been wanting to spread this necromantic plague
Hmm.
at the command of a god. And they stopped it, but they ended up fighting the person. And this was one of the earlier episodes, so I guess I can say a little more about it, but like one of the things that I threw into the combat, because the combat itself wasn't particularly difficult, but it was one of the most devastating combats that my players came across because it included that necromancer had brought one of the PC's loved ones back as a zombie
Oh,
uh in his army, and that very quickly devastated that particular player and brought him to actions in combat that he wouldn't typically take because of the fact that his wife's corpse was being used.
yeah, that sounds horrific and amazing at the same time.
It's
Which is my wheelhouse.
it was a devastating choice to as far as story goes, but we ended the recording and even though that player was in tears, he was like, "Give me 10 minutes to calm down." And then he came back and was like, "Emma, that was evil and I loved it."
Yeah, there's always like a sense of satisfaction when you get a reaction out of a
Mhm.
player, an emotional reaction. It can be joy, it can be heartbreak, it can be, and it can be humor,
Mhm.
it can be anything, but just having the player turn around and kind of go, yeah, you had me in tears,
Mhm.
is it's a great feeling. It's a great feeling to have that emotional sway.
Mhm.
And any time that it's happened to me is those are the times that I kind of feel reassured that I'm doing a good job, and that imposter syndrome kind of gets shelved for the rest of the day, so to speak.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. And I love those moments too, because it's one of those moments where those are the things that tell you that you're creating a great story. Because sometimes when you have an audience for an actual play, like certain things will land with an audience and certain things won't. But one of the things that I've found is if you pay attention to the audience, you're not necessarily going to serve everyone. And even though the goal
Mm.
is to like find the audience, uh, the podcast makes its way to those who are going to enjoy listening to that story. And they will have different opinions because they weren't living in that story. Your players experience it in a very different way. And so having those emotional reactions and having those check-ins with your players of what worked really well, what didn't, is really how I gauge how I'm doing as a storyteller and how I mold that story to make sure that it's uh obviously when you produce an actual play you want to make sure that you're telling a compelling story, but the players are just as much a part of that story as your vision as a storyteller. So, knowing that you can get those emotional reactions from the players is kind of what I see as like a goalpost of whether or not I'm telling the right story.
So, is it fair to say that you kind of see a difference between listener feedback and player feedback? Do you kind of use those two things as different metrics?
I do. Mainly because right now we are very small. Like I independently fund our podcast network. So it's not like we have a studio producer to worry about when it comes to the opinions of the show, like some bigger podcasts
Mm.
that are produced by full studios do. However, uh making sure that the players are enjoying themselves, because especially if they're going to be locked in for a 2-year campaign or even multiple campaigns in the same world, you want to make sure that they're enjoying the stories that they're telling. So that is a metric that we use to make sure that the podcasts are going well, and how we sort of gauge whether or not a podcast is going well. Because if the players aren't enjoying themselves, then no one's going to enjoy listening to it, is also what I've found. The listener feedback is usually in those cases where the players are having a great time and it shows, is normally very positive. But there is a difference in listener feedback in the sense that listeners are experiencing that from the outside. So it's similar to if you're watching like your favorite TV show or your favorite actual play, like you're going to think about those characters differently because you're not living in that moment. Uh and you're going to notice things uh in those performances and that the players wouldn't have even noticed in the moment. So like I've found interesting comments made by people who have watched uh that players were like, "Oh, I wasn't even thinking about that." Or I had in sort of the initial arc of Chronicles of Kriath, they had gone to a small town, and this was sort of their like introductory quest to get them working together as a party, and they dealt with this uh snake that was actually responsible for the disappearances of multiple people because it was big enough to actually eat people. And they dealt with that issue in the town, and made sure that the town wasn't losing any more people. But, uh, and hopefully this person never listens to this because they gave me far more credit than I was due. But they were like, "Oh, this is a really cool like reference to the Garden of Eden and all this other stuff." And I was like, yeah, that's a really cool coincidence that that showed up, and I was
Yeah,
like,
I'm
I
100% meant to do that.
Exactly. It was like I didn't even put that connection together, but they made this whole connection based off of these things that the party was doing and how they were fighting this creature. And I was like, I had to re-listen to that whole arc again just to see it from that perspective. And I was like, they're right. How did I not see all these references here that I like subtly made without even thinking about it?
No, but that is cool to know that you've got someone that is listening to what you produced with such intent to be able to
Mhm.
pick up on things that may or may not have been subliminal, or they may have just been coincidental, but for to have someone paying enough attention to kind of go, oh, I noticed this.
Mhm.
I mean, that must
Exactly.
be phenomenal. So I wanted to ask you about your sort of storytelling process, because
Mhm.
Chronicles of Kriath is a homebrew world, and I think
Mhm.
from the inception it has been a podcast.
Mhm.
So we all like to create our stories and our adventures differently. So I was just trying to kind of pick at your sort of process, and just to kind of see how you go about it. Do you like to have everything sort of pre-written? Do you kind of work with the sort of character decisions and kind of go from there?
Mhm. So I started Kriath with the building of the world. My DM style is very much like build up the backbone and let the players uh take it in the direction that they will. Because and I learned this from a friend of mine who's been DMing for almost 2 decades now. And he kind of taught me like this principle of what's going on in the world does not stop just because the party is not seeing it. And so having that lore in the background and having all of the detail surrounding the world itself better allows the players to affect that world and make an impact on it through the storytelling.
Mm.
So when they travel places, usually the players will also tell me like what kind of stuff they're looking to do. And
Mm.
I have an overarching plan for the overarching story of the podcast itself. However, especially with Chronicles of Kriath, that plan also greatly evolved because of some key decisions that the characters made. Um, Again, not to spoil anything, but they kind of created their own BBEG. That was not meant to be the BBEG of the main campaign, but they made him one. And so that's been really interesting for me because I was like, they made so many decisions that like I can't call them wrong decisions because they've led to interesting plot
Yeah.
points still, but they made decisions that I did not expect that brought the story in a completely different direction, and I was able to, because I had the lore established in the background, say, okay, these are the things that are happening with this particular bad guy who they've now elevated to a new height through their decisions. And this is how this is going to move forward. So it's a nice mix of taking the main plot that I came in with, the lore that I created in the background beforehand. I think I spent 3 months before the start of recording, before we even sat down and had our session 0 and started discussing character, seriously, where I was like, "Okay, this is when you need to have your backstory to me." I had sat down and I had developed all the world lore and everything.
Mm.
Um, and having that 3 months of fleshing out the world in the sense of how it works with or without the players present allowed me to, when the players came in and impacted that both through their backstories and what they established for their characters and through their actions in the podcast itself, I was able to say, okay, I know exactly how politics in this area work and how
Yeah.
this NPC would go about doing this because of what the players did. I can now craft what's going on in the background that's influencing what the players will encounter in the future.
Yeah, that's very similar to my process. Again,
Mhm.
much like you, I have a backbone. In my case, my homebrew campaign, I
Mhm.
don't have the world fleshed out because we're playing in Galarium, which is
Mhm.
the Pathfinder setting. So we're
Mhm.
just kind of leaning on that. But in terms of the actual story, yeah, for me it was I set up a series of goalposts
Hmm.
that the in order to accomplish what the players needed to do, they had
Mhm.
to get each of these goalposts, but then they themselves can move depending on what the players decide to do. And it's funny you mentioned the players changing the sort of direction of the
Mhm.
story with their decisions, because there was one defining moment in our campaign where at the very beginning, players had MacGuffin, bad guys
Mhm.
coming for MacGuffin, and one of the players went, I'm tempted to just give it to them and run away. And after the fact, they asked me, would we have derailed the campaign? And my response was no. You would have just set it in a completely different direction.
Mhm.
And that is something that I always enjoy. I enjoy the players having a tangible impact on the world,
Mhm.
but also at the same time, the world keeps spinning whether they're there or not.
Mhm. And it gives the players a different experience too, because I've played in games where DMs have tried to completely railroad uh the players to do things the way that they've wanted, and no one that I knew in that game ever enjoyed that experience. They could tell that the DM wanted to tell a specific story, and I remember distinctly one of them saying if he wanted it to go about that way, he should have written a novel instead. And I think that's the key difference between stories like that and TTRPGs, because it's so collaborative and everyone needs to have that impact to feel fulfilled in that game.
I think there is something to kind of say towards um the pre-written modules. And I think
Mhm.
they have at least a partial amount of blame for that sort of mindset, for
Mhm.
that sort of, this is the story, this is what you need to do, and any deviation from that is upsetting the status quo. Because I,
Mhm.
for one, have felt that when I've run an adventure path,
Mhm.
especially kind of going, oh shit, they're wanting to do this, they're wanting to go off rails, and nothing in the book accounts for that.
Mhm.
Um, but again, I think it's a learned process as well.
Mhm. And I think that's one of the interesting things, because I tried to run Curse of Strahd uh from 5e, and it's funny how much I as a homebrew DM have struggled moving to a module, because I thought it would be easier because I wouldn't have to prep a whole brand new storyline. And then I started looking at the module and was like, but some of how the person wrote this makes no sense to me and my storytelling brain. So there's been this weird overlap where I'm trying to understand the storytelling of the person who wrote Curse of Strahd and mold it with my own. And I think that's where homebrew DMs have a bit of an advantage because they're adaptable enough that they can say, okay, this isn't the end all be all, it's a guideline. If I don't like something, I can change it.
Yeah, I mean, there is this fallacy that running pre-written campaigns is easier.
Mhm.
At least for me, it's not. I
Not at all.
find it harder. I find it
Mhm.
a lot harder because for me to memorize someone else's work takes an added level of effort. Whereas if I use my sort of game prep template, which is um very short, very to the point, you know, they're here, these are the locations, these are the NPCs. You know, it is basically an info dump which I can just quickly call back to whenever I need. The rest of it I just improvise. And I
Mhm.
find that much easier than getting somebody's work and having to read through it and understand it. And yeah, I don't buy into the myth that pre-written adventures are easier.
Yeah, it is definitely an interesting myth. I definitely think it's helpful for new DMs who don't have any idea of, like, necessarily how they would go about telling the story because they're not familiar with the system and how it can work in conjunction with storytelling. But because even when I started DMing, I ran the D&D starter set, for my family at our kitchen table, and that was how I got started on DMing. But after that, I very quickly realized I wanna tell my own stories, and that was when I sort of moved away from it. So coming back years later after I've been homebrewing for a while, and seeing just how wrong everyone was about, "Oh, running a module is so much easier," was is definitely an interesting experience that I wasn't prepared for in the slightest.
In my case, I ended up homebrewing out of necessity. I ran my players through the Fall of Plaguestone, which was one
Mm.
of the first sort of adventures for Pathfinder Second Edition. We ran
Mm.
through it. And it takes characters from first to fourth level, something along those lines. And they enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, so we decided we'd carry on. So I started looking into modules that would pick up that I could kind of attach on the back of that. And I
Mhm.
realized that I would have to change so much about the module. It was easier just to do my own thing anyway.
Mhm.
And just because of that, that's kind of why I went, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to do my own thing. And we've been, we're getting to the end of the campaign now, and there's been some high points and some low points, but touch wood, so far everyone seems to be having fun.
Good. And that's always the most important part too, especially when you're playing at your own tables just, like, for fun. It's meant to be fun.
Yeah, exactly. So while we're talking about your podcast, I wanted to actually ask you about the newest one.
Yeah.
All Our Faults. Now you're
Mhm.
definitely gonna have to walk me through this because Monster Hearts 2,
Mhm.
not a clue. I have no idea what Monster Hearts 2 is, or
Mhm.
what tell us about the show, tell us about the like brief outline of the story. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in the system as well.
Yeah. So, All Our Faults is a Monster Hearts 2 actual play that's more of a, gritty, realistic, audio drama style edit, podcast. Um, So Monster Hearts 2, to sort of go into that, is I don't know if you're familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse systems at all. It's a
Yeah.
2d6 system. Uh, very much, and I enjoy Monster Hearts 2 mainly because it's very heavily rooted in role play. So you get specific moves for your character that you roll the 2d6 for. Stats are pretty easy to choose and put together. Um, Monster Hearts specifically in that system is you play uh, teens or young adults. In this case, our players are playing high school teenagers going into either their sophomore or junior year of high school. Um, and they are also monsters of some sort. So, for example, the four that we have, only one is a standard main. They're called skins, and that is the vampire. The
Mm.
character Michael is played by, as I had mentioned previously, our good friend Juicy Garland, who is a Boston area drag queen who also does a lot of TTRPG actual plays. Um,
I'm a follower on Threads.
yes, she's fantastic. But uh, in this one, she plays Michael the vampire, who is very much in his essence uh, a rich kid with absent parents who goes seeking attention in all the wrong places. And that's how he sort of stumbles into becoming a vampire and dealing with this new added layer of mess going into his sophomore year of high school. Yes, he's a
Mm.
sophomore. Then we have a couple other skins that are actually fan made that we utilized for the remaining characters. So we have Bert, who's a Reaper. So essentially, he becomes a Grim Reaper, and in the story is assisting Death with dealing with all of the supernatural phenomenons around the city that they're in called Chester's Chasm. And then we have Crispin, who is a skin called the Knight. Uh, they sort of have this. The premise of the skin is that they're dealing with this personal dilemma of uh, what they call like fighting a dragon. So each knight in medieval fantasy has their dragon that they're fighting. In Crispin's case, it's being born into a family that's part of a religious cult and escaping this faith that he's not even sure he entirely believes anymore, and begins questioning that faith. And then we have Celine, who is a skin that's called the Hunted. The Hunted's struggle is mainly that, as is implied by the name, they're being chased or hunted by something. In Celine's case, she is half fae, so she is half human, half fae, and her father is the king of the Unseelie Court. Now, that brings a lot of enemies, and in Celine's case, one of his enemies sent someone after her back into the mortal realm outside of the Fey realm. So she is now dealing with being hunted as well as all of the regular issues of being a high school teenager. And
I
so
think
all
it
four.
sounds really. It sounds like it could well easily be a TV show.
Mhm. And
You
that's
know, it sounds compelling. It sounds, it sounds. I mean, it. I'm immediately sort of getting Buffy the Vampire Slayer sort
Mhm.
of vibes, where there is this supernatural element to it, but there is also the sort of the pressures of being a kid in school.
Mhm.
It sounds phenomenal. I am definitely going to have to give that one a listen.
Yeah, that's definitely been our most popular podcast so far, and for good reason. The cast does an amazing job of leaning into those struggles and really letting the story move forward in a way that um Monster Hearts in and of itself has this interesting piece to it that it describes in the rule book, where it says, I don't remember the exact quote, but it says to keep the story feral in the sense that the safest choice for your character may not always be the best choice for the story. So
Hmm.
it encourages players to, even though some a certain choice may be better for the character in the long run, uh, to make those choices that, while not necessarily the best for the character in that moment, keep the story interesting. And I think that creates a very different level of gameplay that creates kind of those Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I know, like, Supernatural, like, some of those vibes, in the gameplay as well.
Yeah, Justin and I, and my experience with Powered by the Apocalypse is
Mhm.
Monster of the Week.
Ooh.
So we leaned into Supernatural very,
Mhm.
very heavily. The keeper
Mhm.
of those sessions, huge Supernatural fan. All the players, huge Supernatural fans. So we had all these playbooks where we could kind of, maybe get inspired by Buffy or get inspired. No, all Supernatural. I think there, I think about three of us were Dean.
That's definitely an interesting thought, having 3 Dean Winchesters in one gameplay session. Was
Yeah,
that
I
as
know.
chaotic as I think it would be?
Unfortunately, we never actually got to play together. It was played in two different sessions. But
Huh.
I know Justin had a Dean character. I had a Dean character. I'm not entirely sure who else, but we definitely need to kind of revisit that and just all of us get together and just watch it go off the rails.
Oh,
There was
absolutely.
there was a bit of something I learned from Monster of the Week, that I've tried to kind of carry over into every system that I play. Similar to how Monster Hearts has got keep things feral in Monster of the Week, it is the advice for the keeper is you are a fan of the player characters.
Mm.
You want to see them succeed. You are rooting for them.
Mhm.
And that did alter my GM style throughout all the systems that I play. And I think they are fantastic. The Powered
Mhm.
by the Apocalypse um family as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. Because I've been looking into Masks, which is like a superhero style
Yes. Hmm.
system, and I've really enjoyed reading through that because though all of the moves are very different, um, the thing I love about Powered by the Apocalypse games is that all the moves, they're not necessarily just for combat situations, kind of like in D&D where a lot of your abilities tend to lean towards being combat focused. You have these moves and abilities that lend to the role play
Yeah.
rather than just the combat moments.
Yeah, I've started Avatar Legends
Mm.
with my son. And again, it's, the moves can apply in combat as well as out of combat.
Mhm.
And because they are quite vague and they are, to a certain degree designed to kind of overlap with one another.
Mhm.
So, when his character wants to do something, we'll stop and we'll kind of go, right, how do you think this would be? Do you want to rely on your training? Do you want to, that sort of thing? And
Mhm.
I think they are great systems. especially for people who are looking for a more narrative style of play.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily powered by the apocalypse, but there is some inspiration from it. Blades in the Dark,
Mhm.
which I've started getting quite heavily into. Again, it does take me away from the sort of mechanic crunch heavy Pathfinder second edition to be able to go, we're
Mhm.
just gonna see what happens and let the dice decide on the direction the story's gonna go.
Yeah, definitely. And I love those narrative driven systems. Like Monster Hearts was the first thing I played outside of D&D. Uh, and then that led to things like World of Darkness, which is still a very crunchy system, but has a lot of interesting things embedded into it to lend to the role play, like with all the lore and everything as well. I haven't played Blades in the Dark yet, but it is definitely high on my list. And then I found 10 Candles, which is a really fun one. Uh, it's more of a one-shot system. So it's the whole premise of it is that the characters are going to die by the end. So it's a
Okay.
horror-based system, and you get a pool of D6s and, things become a bit more difficult, but it's also one of those systems that's very improv-based. Uh, there are very few steps to character creation. You can all I think the longest game I've had of it was around 6 hours, um,
Hmm.
in its entirety of putting together the characters and running the one shot itself. But, the whole point of it is that there's the players and then there's them, which this enemy can be anything depending on what the players decide. So, like, I've had some that were, like, werewolves that were, these weird, like, bug creatures. The players will usually sort of give some sort of descriptor to it that will lend to the GM's running of how they affect the story, but their one weakness is the light. And in this world
Okay.
that has been enshrouded in darkness, these players have to find some sort of hope and do their best to find a way to survive. And
I mean, that sounds really interesting. I mean, you had me when you said horror. That was yeah,
Mhm,
that was you said horror and all of a sudden I kind of, sat up like a meerkat.
mhm. See, it's funny because I don't really like horror movies, but I love horror TTRPGs.
100% the same. I'm not a I mean, I don't mind horror literature. I don't like horror movies.
Mhm,
I don't like horror video games. But, any sort of book or a tabletop role playing game where,
mhm,
yeah, I eat that up. And I do
mhm,
enjoy horror. Because I think it is, again, a visceral reaction from the players. When the players are afraid, it's a genuine thing. It's
mhm,
not them pretending. We ran a Delta Green one shot
mhm.
that Justin was a part of. I'm not going to go into how Justin's character died, but it was funny. But beside that, um, the one shot is designed to be an escalating threat. The
Mhm,
the things you start seeing initially are innocuous enough, but there is a progression and things get more and more sinister and more twisted. And one of the players, after about an hour and a half into the game, went, "We've not done anything," and I'm petrified. Because it was just the expectation of things going wrong.
mhm.
And that, I mean, one of the reasons why I love that system is just it does that horror carries across really well.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting because I've played both Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green, and I think both of those lean into that horror aspect of creating that expectation that something is going to go wrong. Uh, and they lean into it very differently because uh, Juicy was the one who introduced me to Delta Green, and I played in a streamed one shot with them called Operation Excelsior. And it was interesting because it seemed very innocuous at first, and slowly, she started adding in all of those layers, like, uh, of the weird monster that we kind of encountered in this underground, like, tunnel below a subway that, Delta Green had sent our agents to go speak to, and then we returned from that tunnel, and I remember this was the moment that my character had, like, a sanity break, because I failed the sanity roll, uh, because we left that tunnel, and all of a sudden, she was the first to realize that 3 weeks had passed since they'd walked into that tunnel, and it was just that moment of because in and of itself, there was no jump scare in that moment. There was no
Yeah.
truly, like, things that you would see in a horror movie that people use to get an audience reaction. There was just a genuine, "I just lost 3 weeks of my life walking into a
Yeah.
tunnel," and it just completely broke her brain to the point that she essentially found the nearest passerby and freaked out on them, and seeing that happen versus some of the stuff that you see come out of horror movies has a different connotation to it in play.
Yeah, I think that is existential horror in a nutshell. There are no rules.
Mhm.
You know, when you're dealing with like horror movies and most horror stories, there is there is a certain formula. There is a
Mhm.
certain, okay, this thing can exist within the parameters of this story that we are telling. Whereas in when you get to existential horror, which Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, Achtung Cthulhu are all parts of, is like, yeah, that there are no rules anymore.
Mhm.
You know, it is quite feasible in a Delta Green game to walk into a tunnel and walk back out 3 weeks later with no recollection. And the one that we ran for Justin and a couple of friends is PX Poker Night. It is designed to be a sort of intro scenario to Delta Green, and the insanity mechanics in that are slightly different than Delta Green because there are predefined actions. So when this
Mm.
character goes insane, this is what they do. And one of the character went insane, and what his card told him to do was you basically strip down naked and you kill anything and everything you see.
Oh.
And it was just so happened that he was away from the rest of the party when this happened. And Justin's character went, I'm going to go check on him.
Oh, no.
So, and Justin didn't know this was going on because I was private messaging the other player, kind of going, all right, so this is what happens to you. So Justin's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go. So this other player's messaging me and going, yeah, bring him now. And yes, he promptly got shot in the face.
Sounds about right.
It was an epic death, though. I will give him that.
That does
Justin, if
sound like
Justin does some, if Justin does something really good, it's dying in character.
That's definitely a fun thing to be known for, but I wouldn't get super attached to my characters at that point because it's like, okay, if I know it's going to die, then why would I create those tethers for myself?
But sometimes that can be a lot more fun because you know you've
Mhm.
the sort of set. What is he? Justin is actually showing us. Is that your D&D Beyond character roster? Justin has literally just
Yes,
shown us.
that is my D&D character. Like all my D&D Beyond characters is what I just scrolled through there. Yes, I build lots of them so I don't get attached.
That is completely fair.
It would be really sad if it wasn't so funny.
Yeah. I mean, there are certain characters that I've formed, like, that I have become emotionally attached to. Like, there was one centaur paladin that I made that honestly, that character changed the way that I role played, in the sense that that was the first game that I really got into that was outside of like my group of high school friends that I had learned how to play with. And uh B was really the first character that I sort of fell into in the same way that I, in like a theater role, would approach a character. So I became engrossed in telling the story from the perspective of the character, as opposed to thinking of D&D really as a game, or TTRPGs in general as just a game.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's
Mhm.
you know, we start out and we start playing these games and we soon realize that these games are a part of our lives, and these characters that we have become, to a certain degree, tangible.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, because I'm mostly GM, I've not really had that much attachment to to many characters, but I still remember my first character and the attachment I had with him, and how it affected me when he died.
Mhm.
And the same goes for Edgar in our Fabula campaign. It's like, if he dies, it's gonna have to be something epic.
Mhm. No,
Because if
definitely.
not, I'm not gonna be satisfied.
Mhm.
So, every week we try and answer some questions from listeners, and obviously with Justin being barely able to speak, and I think the whole D&D comment may have tired him out for the evening. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind helping us with some of these questions.
Not at all. Go ahead.
Okay. So the first question we have from one of our regular question askers, Sci-Fi, who apparently is feeling creative today.
Ooh. Okay.
Um, he has posted this question, and it's: do you enjoy festive adventures at this time of year, either running them or taking part?
Mm. That's interesting, because I myself don't get into that festive spirit around this time of year quite so much. But I did actually help a friend write a Christmas one-shot adventure. Uh, that was really fun, that, they're going to be running on their stream, I think closer to the end of the month. I think if this time of year and getting into the festive spirit really is your thing, then having that holiday one shot or that holiday session in your game can sort of bring you closer to the characters, in the sense that you're tying in the real world with the characters' world, and sort of gives you that additional attachment to the characters. I think it really depends on where you lean into things, because I actively encouraged my friend, like I said, to lean away from the tropes that people expect out of a Christmas movie, kind of like how we were talking about horror movies and Cthulhu and Delta Green. So
Yeah.
I think it's fun if you take those ideas and you twist them and flip them on their head, so that it's like, okay, everyone expects this specific thing. I'm gonna give them the exact opposite and see how they react to this Christmas one shot being turned on its head.
Well, Justin and I are grinning like Cheshire cats right now because we have recently done a Christmas festive actual play with the guys over at Crossing the Nerdverse,
Mhm.
and a lot of the things that you've just said are basically what we did.
Oh yeah.
I think except for don't lean into tropes, we leaned in hard.
Oh, gotcha.
And yeah, unapologetically, we leaned in very hard, and it was a blast. I'm not the most festive person, but it was a ton of fun. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Boss Jellybean on Threads. They actually sent in a project for us to take a look at, which we haven't really had time to do that today, but this one is a bit time sensitive because they have created the Festive 3, which is a holiday themed adventure on Dungeon Masters Guild. It's on there for $5 and embark on a holiday adventure in the sinister festive realms. A dreamscape mirroring Baldur's Gate where nightmares manifest in the form of the Festive 3. Krampus Baal, Merkel's Dreidel, and Santa Bane. Players will encounter eerie carolers and twisted toys under the blanket of a perpetual snowstorm, face progressively challenging encounters against the malevolent trio, and unravel mysteries and fight for joy in this festive theme journey.
Mm.
So that actually sounds really interesting.
No, definitely. That sounds like taking the festive times and putting a horror twist on it, which I enjoy.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, Justin may want to run that at some point, or to be honest, I may buy it and convert it to a system that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, that
But
sounds
it
cool.
is. I mean, to be honest, Justin, are you able to throw some of the artwork up for this? Because the artwork is phenomenal.
No, I've seen that around Threads too, and the cover art is beautiful for that particular module.
It is. It is really nice.
Mhm.
But we will get back on track. I'm sorry. I just had to. The other ones aren't as time sensitive. I thought this time of year,
Mhm.
then a festive adventure definitely could do with a plug.
Oh, definitely. And especially now that a lot of people are moving away from after the layoffs, moving away from WotC produced
Oh,
content. It's a great time
yeah,
to support your independent creators, folks.
100%. And just my thoughts kind of go out to anybody who's been impacted by this horrible
Mhm.
decision that has been made, and I do hope they land on their feet.
Absolutely.
So the next question comes from Couch, who is in our chat tonight. Coincidentally, he is the GM that we were mentioning ran the Monster of the Week campaign with multiple deans. He
Ooh.
attests that it was a good. He attests that it was a good laugh. So Couch, who is in a Xmas hell of corporations making.
Mm.
How would you approach leveling in your games? Would you let players earn XP from everything they do and track exact points for levels, or do you do milestone levels? How do you feel about high level systems and games?
Hmm. See, I've run it both ways, and I've found milestone leveling to be more narratively satisfying. So if you have it really depends on what kind of group you have, because there are some groups that really are there for the numbers crunch. And if you're that type of player, then XP leveling where you track exactly how many points you earn from killing a specific monster is more satisfying to you. But if you're there for the story and the progression of the story, milestone leveling definitely fits that better in the sense that uh, your players are going to receive more narrative satisfaction from that crazy boss fight that was tied into someone's backstory and hearing that, hey, you just leveled up after they've completed that fight, then being like, oh, hey guys, you just finished this awesome boss fight that was tied to your backstory. Here's how many XP points you get.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I kind of do a mix of the two.
Mhm.
I like milestone leveling because of the narrative satisfaction that provides, but I also track the XP, so to get a rough idea as to when to introduce that milestone.
Mhm.
I'll keep a rough estimate. I won't let the players know. It'll all be done behind the GM screen. But when it gets
Mm.
to close to leveling up, it's okay. Now I need to introduce a boss. Now I need to
Mm.
make it, a lot more satisfactory and a lot more. I need to raise the stakes so it feels like something has been overcome. So I
Yeah.
kind of do a weird mix of the two.
That's definitely interesting. Cause I know some players, they like to know everything that's going on behind the GM screen, or at least as much as we can provide them. So, it's fun kinda to think of keeping track of that yourself off to the side and then using that to influence the milestone leveling. That's not something I've thought of
Hmm.
before.
Yeah, well, for the players that do like to know everything that's going on behind the GM screen, I just normally keep a spray bottle next to me, so when they start peering up, just give them a little "Yeah, get back" sort of thing. And after a few times, they kind of learn their lesson and
Mhm.
they kind of stay there. So how do you feel about sort of high level um systems and games?
I think, I haven't run a lot of them, but from what I've seen, I tend to find that most of the narrative driven systems don't have that leveling system or don't really go super high level and for good reason. Because at least what I've seen, like you get that stereotype in D&D where like the players will literally say, "Oh, we're gods now." And in some cases like I think most DMs will find ways to work that into their story as I have as well because my players are definitely getting up there in Chronicles of Kriath to like level 11, 12, getting to that higher level spot. But I think it comes with some interesting challenges because once you get to that point where these characters are sort of all powerful in the sense of how gods are, how do you find things that are going to be genuinely interesting for them to combat either narratively or uh, in a combat setting?
Yeah, I agree. I have run a high level Pathfinder first edition campaign,
Mm.
and it got to a point where it just went off the rails. There was no I was having to do so much work to provide a challenge to the party as a whole. And
Mhm.
at the same time, what that would make, it would make certain party members to a certain degree irrelevant because they hadn't optimized as much as the others. And I just kind of
Mhm.
felt like it really put a sort of a dark sort of take on the game. Whereas in
Mhm.
my Pathfinder second edition campaign, we are now hitting 19th level, and yes, the player characters are gods, but without me having to make any modification, the things that they are facing are god killers.
Mhm.
So there is always that element of challenge, no matter how high level they get.
Mhm.
With just using whatever's in the book, I can bring something out, and that our paladin has got an AC of 48 with his shield raised,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, about 3 sessions ago, he nearly died.
Mhm.
because that AC of 48 was not enough. And it was
Wow.
just constant because the game is very tightly balanced and it is kind
Mm.
of catered to high level play as
Hmm.
opposed to Pathfinder First Edition, where it was once you pass 13, 14, you might as well just give
Mhm.
the players the book and let them crack on.
Yeah, and I've played, some of Pathfinder First Edition, as well, so I've played a couple sessions in that. Second edition, I'm not as familiar with. But I think to answer the question, it's more of like you said, it's Pathfinder 2e is more geared towards that high level play. D&D 5e is not quite as tightly balanced. So it's so
Mm.
hard to like I'll think that I have the challenge rating worked out right and then my players will just obliterate whatever I put in front of them. So it's really about finding that system if you want to have the high level play that makes it easy for you to present a challenge at high level rather than leaving either one party or another frustrated that they weren't able to do as much as they'd hoped.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I do think that at least in the systems that I'm currently playing, I don't
Mm.
see that as a challenge. I think it is a carryover from the old D20 sort of
Mhm.
systems from D&D 3.5, where yeah, the players had high numbers, but there wasn't a challenge that could hit them, and I think that's just something that's kind of stayed. They've obviously addressed it already in second edition, and I'm hoping it's something that they address in the new, not even a new edition, but the new addition to
Mhm.
5e that they're bringing out. So fingers crossed. Hopefully people can get to enjoy high level play.
Yeah, here's hoping that they balance that out enough.
Yeah, I do hope so. Okay, so let's go on to another question. This one comes from Corvus, who's writing to us from Denova Palace. Was that a rat I just saw with Grim? Corvus is in our Fabula game. I'm assuming that that's something that happened in the last session that Justin and I weren't there for. So thanks,
Oh,
spoilers.
no.
But his question is, as far as being a player goes, what are your most and least favorite parts of it?
Mm. So, my most favorite part of being a player is I think when you get the DM's concept for the story. Mainly because that's when I'm a player, that is usually what I will use to influence my backstory and how I write the character. Because sometimes I'll go into a campaign and say, like, hey, I already wanted to play this character. But even if I bring in a loose concept, I let the world shape the type of character that I want to play. And I think um finding that point where I can connect my character to the story is the thing that makes me the most excited. Or even leaving that possibility open for the DM. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
Mhm. Sorry, go ahead.
I know. I mean, for me, my favorite and least favorite are the same thing, but it's two sides of the same coin. For
Okay.
me, it's the singular focus.
Mm.
Because on one side of it, I can focus and put all my sort of creative energy into one character. And as you said, take the cues from the GM and apply them to my character and have these conversations where I'm sure our GM Couch is already sick of me, where I can message him and kind of go, I've been thinking, this is what I'm thinking. This is, I've been thinking this for my character. What do you think? Would this work? And having that sort of singular creative outlet to kind of
Mhm.
pour all my efforts into, I love. But conversely, that singular focus comes back to haunt me, especially when we're dealing with things like combat, because
Mm.
I'm so used to spinning a multitude of plates during a combat that when I'm only having to do one thing, I do
Mhm.
that thing, and then the rest of it, I'm just kind of sat there waiting with my mind kind of going a million miles a minute. Whereas
Mhm.
I'm not able, I struggle with that.
Yeah, I think I was gonna say my least favorite is sort of, depending on the system, of course, the clunkiness of combat in
Mm,
TTRPG. Um, because like you said, especially this is especially a problem for 5e and other, like, D20 systems where, you've got that turn-based, initiative
mm,
that you have to worry about. It's like you're sitting there, you feel like you're twiddling your thumbs because you have ideas on what your character would do in this particular
mm,
situation and with what's available, but it's not your turn yet. And then waiting to see how everyone else's turns go. There have been very few points where I've been heavily invested in a combat, and it's normally been when things turn sour in some form or when another person's character or even mine is in active danger,
mm.
because
Yeah,
you don't necessarily get that feeling with every combat.
yeah. I mean, that is somewhat mitigated in Fabula Ultima, and that's kind of one of the reasons
Mhm.
why we like the system so much. Because the way their combat works
Mhm.
is that initiative rolled, and it goes essentially players, GM, players, GM, players, GM. And it is very reminiscent of the JRPG video games where the players can decide who's going in their turn.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times it does create a conversation between us of kind of going, okay, so if you were to do this now, and that would benefit for the next turn where I could do this. And even though you've
Mhm.
already taken your turn, you are still part of that decision making process to a certain degree.
Mhm.
So a lot of the waiting around is mitigated by that. So it is.
Hmm.
I highly recommend that system if you ever wanted to try something.
I'll have to take a look at it because I've never
Mm,
Fabula Ultima's one I haven't heard of yet, so that's one I'll have to look into for sure.
yeah, Justin's a big fan. Justin is a big fan. We I think before realizing just how prominent it had become, we covered it on the show
Hmm.
with Couch RGM because he's very into JRPGs, and okay, this is something you might like.
Mhm.
The following week, we realized it had won an Emmy.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, okay, so we apparently we've got good taste. So yeah, Couch has thrown himself into that, and we've been taken along for the ride, and it's been fantastic so far. It's good to be a player again and focus on good old Edgar, my
Mhm.
character, my gunslinger, tinkerer, cleric.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's do one more from sci-fi, I think, before we wrap it up.
Mhm.
Okay, sci-fi was very prominent this week. We're not going to be able to get through all of his questions. We're going to save some for the new year. But we are going to answer one more. And I'm actually going to wrap these two questions into one because I think it makes sense.
Mhm.
So, sci-fi, who is writing for us, living life on the edge of the sofa, he has asked, what are your most memorable characters? And in the same vein, what is the worst character you have ever played?
Mm. Okay. So, most memorable characters, definitely the one that I mentioned previously, the Centaur Paladin that sort of got
Mm,
me into role play heavy games in the first place. His name was Danix. He was a Centaur Paladin that worshipped the gods of, war and peace,
okay.
and then watched his arc was very interesting because he then, while trying to balance those two entities, had to watch those gods die and figure out how to embody those ideals himself without the presence of those gods, which I found to be a really interesting and impactful arc. Because there was a point where he had, until he figured it out for himself, he had no access to the power that they had provided because they died. And
that sounds amazing. I just want to kind of interject and say that.
no, yeah, it
God,
was
I wish I could think of a story arc like that.
it was great, and that wasn't something that I had originally written into my backstory at all either. That came entirely from the DM, Jeremy, who's a good friend of mine and has been DMing for almost 20 years now. So he started back in the days of like 3.5 and a lot of the earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons. And so he's had a lot of practice with a lot of the story-driven areas of running D&D. And I think to answer the other side of the question, like the least interesting characters, I think a lot of the characters I made early on in my days of playing D&D were very not so fleshed out. And there's one in particular that I enjoyed playing, but it was a family game that my stepdad, who'd played a lot of the early days, he tried to run a D&D for myself, my brother, and my mom. And he decided he didn't quite go about it in the same way that that other DM did with the railroading, but he decided that he was going to make up the backstories for us. And I just
Okay.
didn't have the same connection to the character because he'd written the backstory and he wouldn't let me have that creative input. He basically just went, "Okay, what type of character do you want to play? You want to play a dwarf barbarian. Okay, interesting. Cool." And then after we had sat down and had that initial discussion, he came back to me and was like, "Here's the 3-page backstory I've written up for your character." And I was like, "Oh, I don't get a say in that?" And yeah, it was weird. It only
Yeah.
lasted like 3 sessions, but trying to rationalize his decisions for that character being the way it was weird, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, you may as well play a pre-gen at that point.
Mhm, exactly.
You know. All right. As for me, I've mentioned him a few times on this podcast, and I suppose I'll carry on mentioning him. My first ever character, Nahash. He was a bard. He, he was kind of from the school of hard knocks to a certain degree. And from a very early age, he kind of realized his potential as a charismatic sort of character, and he would use that to kind of run cons and swindles. And then he eventually found himself using that for, I'll say, the greater good,
Okay.
because he committed atrocities for what his sense of morality was.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then he kind of joined this party, and there was a whole arc where we still had the alignment system, and he started out as a chaotic neutral character, and gradually kind of shifted into chaotic good. So he always had that
Mm.
sort of unpredictable nature, but there was a purpose, there was a moral code to it. I
Mhm.
love that character, and he died, unfortunately,
Oh.
but he got an amazing send off from our GM. Conversely, the character that I replaced him with was probably my least favorite.
Mm.
I created a summoner in Pathfinder First Edition
Okay.
who I had the initial concept, quite I liked the initial concept, and she was kind of based on River Tam out of Firefly and
Okay.
the follow-up movie, where she would seem somewhat distant, she would seem somewhat scattered, but there was a purpose to her.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the way the summoner worked in Pathfinder First Edition, fucking broken.
Mm-hmm.
She essentially had an Eidolon with an armor class of 49. So
Yikes.
the Eidolon became the protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't get as much enjoyment out of role playing this character that I originally had intended to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there were my highs and my lows.
Yeah, that's interesting because especially the fact that those two characters ended up in the same campaign after you lost the first one and having that sort of flip in did that change your attitude about the game at all? Like showing up to game, having that character that you
Not
didn't quite like after that
not
huge high?
really. Not really, because it did was kind of shift my focus in the game. So rather than role playing ROLE, I was role playing ROLL.
Mm,
It was all mechanics. It was okay. So I'm gonna be this class is a pain in the ass for a GM. I'm gonna
mhm.
live up to that, and I feel sorry for Scott because I did. Whether it was okay, I'm gonna plant my idol on here, and good luck hitting me.
Mhm.
And if not, I'd dismiss the Eidolon. And with the amount of abilities that this character had to summon creatures, I could Zerg rush an entire encounter.
Mhm.
No, it was a one-man party, and it changed my focus a lot in the campaign. I think I would have enjoyed it more had roleplay been more of a prominent part of that.
Mhm. Gotcha.
But yeah, so I do believe that's all we've got time for. I just want to quickly thank all the question askers, Couch, Sci-Fi, and Corvus. Huge, huge thank you to Emma for coming on here and joining us. You have been an absolute delight to talk to, and it's unfortunate that Justin hasn't been able to partake, but we've had him on camera here. We've seen him react to things, and I know he's enjoyed it as much as I have.
Well, thank you so much for
Um,
having me.
Not to worry. Do you want to tell the listeners where they can find you, how they can consume things from Tabletop Tale Spinners?
Absolutely. So Tabletop Tale Spinners, we do have a link tree. We're on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads, which is how we found these two awesome people. Um, at Tabletop Tale Spinners. We are also on Blue Sky at T-Top Tail Spinners because apparently Tabletop Tail Spinners was too long for Blue Sky. Um, you can find our 3 podcasts wherever you find podcasts. Chronicles of Kriath, which is our long-term D&D 5e game. Improv Madness, which is our one-shot podcast, also mainly D&D 5e, but like I said, we will have some other systems appearing throughout that as well. And then our Monster Hearts 2 podcast, All Our Faults, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Amazing. Justin, are you feeling well enough to pop on and just tell people where they can find you?
Sure, why not? So I'm on most places at Justin Accurate TV, and on our Facebook group and in the Discord as well.
Thank you, buddy. And there is a bright side to you being ill. That is, there is no way I can have a soundbite of you today. No, there's no way I can do it. I'm stuck. I mean, you've said like 2 things and none of them have been funny.
I love that he's literally cheering.
I managed to get him every single episode, and this is the first time I'm going to have to let the thousands of fans down.
Aw.
But as for me, you can find me at Natural Juan at dice.camp on Mastodon. You can also find me behind our social media presence on Threads, on Blue Sky, and on our Facebook group at Too Legit to Crit. This is the last episode we are recording for 2023. We are taking a break for the holidays to be with our loved ones, and we are going to be back in the new year. We are going to provide you with some content. We're going to probably do a couple of like best of or favorite parts episodes coming up over the next couple of weeks. And also next Friday we release the second part of our Blades in the Dark actual play with the guys over at Crossing the Nerdverse. Trust me, shit goes off the rails in a fantastic way. But most of all, I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy days to come on here and listen to 2 idiots and 1 expert waffle on about tabletop role-playing games. Thank you very much. Good night.
Bye.